So Varesa's banner just recently came out, and as someone who's been at the forefront of her theory crafting ever since her beta, with her being one of my most researched characters, and my most played character ever since her release, because I love this cute bean, I'm here to give an in-depth guide covering all facets of her. Hello there, Flip here, and today we're going to relook at Varesa, to give an updated analysis about her place in the meta, as well as how to play her, her best weapons and artifacts, looking into her teams, and then talk about her constellations. But before we do that, as always, if at any points during the video you're entertained or informed, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing, as I talk on various topics regarding Genshin's meta and I'll try to keep you updated. Shout out to my lovely channel members, your support means the world and back to me, so thank you very much for fueling all of my poor decisions. And with that out of the way, let's begin. Now to kick things off, we're going to briefly be breaking down Varesa's kit, as well as any of her combo optimizations that you may not have known, with and without Xianyun, as I have seen some people play her incorrectly. But anyways, Varesa's a 5-star Electro Catalyst DPS, and her main gimmick is that her playstyle is centered around her plunge combos, starting with her basic attacks. First, unlike a lot of other DPS that have separate multipliers, Varesa's main plunge scaling is in her basic attack, and it's going to be the one you want to prioritize first, and crown, as it leads to the biggest majority of her damage. As an Allen character, Varesa of course uses the Night Soul Blessing state, Night Soul points and so on. She has a maximum capacity of 40 Night Soul points that will not deplete by itself, and the way you accumulate Night Soul points on Varesa is via landing a plunge, which gives her 25 Night Soul points, or using your skill, which gives her 20. When Varesa caps out on Night Soul points, she will enter her form of a Night Soul Blessing called the Fiery Passion state, and in this state she just deals more damage. Also, when she plunges in the Fiery Passion state, this will consume all of her Night Soul points, and make her exit the state. And as you can also see, when you plunge in the Fiery Passion state, this will also enable you to use her special elemental burst, that is just an enhanced plunge essentially, that deals a ton of damage and will only take away 30 energy away from Varesa, instead of the full 70 that her default burst would have. And her burst is going to be the second talent you want to prioritize after your basic attack. Now you may be wondering, how am I supposed to plunge with Varesa when she's on the ground? And there are two ways in her base kit to set up a plunge with her. The first is via doing a manual plunge, which we're able to do when doing a charge attack, as this momentum will center upwards. And the second and more common way you're going to be doing your Varesa plunges is via her elemental skill, which allows you to charge attack very quickly and sends Varesa into the air much faster. Varesa's elemental skill has 2 charges at the base, and when you enter the Fiery Passion state, this will cause the skill cooldown to reset, effectively giving you 4 uses of the skill from 2 charges as long as you plunge. Now regarding Varesa's passive talents, both of them aren't really game shakers and are just more scaling and buffing to Varesa for free. Some people may think that Zhilinin becomes super valuable with Varesa due to her Ascension 4, but this isn't really the case, as Varesa's more specialized archetypes tend to outperform her, even with the value of Zhilinin giving Varesa 2 stacks of her A4 consistently. Going back to her playstyle, to pilot Varesa optimally, you want to use your skill, followed by a charge attack to send you up, and then plunge. And this order of actions I will call a Varesa skill combo. After your first skill combo with 0 Night Soul points, this will send you into the Fiery Passion state, where you will do another skill combo, but because you are in the Fiery Passion state, after plunging you can then briefly input Varesa's special elemental burst. And at C0, that is Varesa's main gameplay loop. Do your first skill combo to send you into the Fiery Passion state, and then do another skill combo in the Fiery Passion state, and then a special elemental burst. For Varesa's most basic rotation, after setting up your supports, Varesa will do 4 skill combos like so. But after your 4th skill combo, you will still have time to perform more actions on Varesa before you need to restart your rotation, which means that you will end off her rotation by doing 2 manual plunges. An important thing to note about this is that after doing the 2 manual plunges, you will leave the field inside Varesa's Fiery Passion state, and why this is important is that when you go to Varesa's next rotation, your first skill combo will be in the Fiery Passion state, and therefore you can perform 3 special bursts in one rotation, as you can see here. When you start your rotation in the Fiery Passion state, your combo does change slightly, as you want to end on the 3rd special burst you do, instead of on rotations where you don't start with Fiery Passion and do the 2 manual plunges. This means that Varesa's second rotation tends to be more smoother and does more damage, but thankfully there's a way to replicate this rotation even on your first one. When starting any combat encounter, you can just open fights by doing a skill combo. In team archetypes like Chevreuse, you want to set up Electro application for overload, so Chevreuse's hold skill actually has a buff, so this doesn't hurt your rotation at all. And because Varesa's skill cooldown is so short, it also doesn't lead to any rotational issues. This setup just allows you to start start with a 3 burst rotation, which increases the amount you get per combat encounter, so it generally ends up being a DPS gain to do this. Now, if you're playing Xuanyun on the other hand, she allows Varesa to perform manual plunges via jumping, instead of this lower charge attack animation, so the rotation you'd rather go with is doing the 4 standard skill combos, and then you want to do 2 jump plunges, which gives you enough time after the second plunge to perform another skill combo, and then you swap off. Your last plunge will give you the cue to perform a special burst, but at this point your buffs will most likely run out, and you would rather restart the rotation and save your energy. This rotation will always leave you with 0 night skill points, so it's infinitely loopable. Varesa is thankfully flexible enough to where as long as you are chaining together skill combos, and not overextending rotations when not necessary, you really shouldn't have that many problems with her, and even in case where you miss a Varesa burst due to energy, which can sometimes happen, this just means that you can add a manual plunge to your rotations, or just immediately start your next skill combo, and this on-the-fly decision making depending on the scenario is why I love playing Varesa so much. And another thing I want to talk about is the fact that Varesa isn't necessarily tied to a skill state, so you can just swap out of her mid-rotation if need be. In a Chevreuse team with Bennett for example, you don't have an off-field pyro applicator, but after performing 2 skill combos, you can just swap into Bennett to reapply pyro and then back into Varesa, so you get full uptime on Chevreuse's resistance shred, and in AoE situations you can swap into your Onoma unit to reapply Viridescent effects, just giving Varesa an extra layer of flexibility. Also, to anyone wondering, I never mentioned Varesa's default elemental burst, and that's because it's bad and you should never use it. It consumes all of your energy in one instance, which just isn't good. And unlike Flynn's where you can maybe potentially use his burst and it can sometimes be optimal, Varesa's default is always a damage loss that messes up your rotations. Please do not use it despite how cool the animation is. That should be all regarding Varesa's kit. Let's talk about how to gear her. Now, before even getting into showing stuff, I feel like a lot of people do underestimate the amount of energy Varesa needs, especially if you're trying to push Stygian. I think it's important to note that having your Varesa on like 110, 120 energy just isn't really enough, especially in rotations where you are using 3 special bursts. The only exception is if you're using like Flynn's or Official, they're Omega batteries, it doesn't matter for them. But if you are using Eonson, who is her best in slot, I would generally recommend a minimum of 130 energy, just so you can burst comfortably with Varesa. Some of Varesa's best supports don't really lose anything by having Favonius, so your Eonson, your Chevreuse, your Xuanyun, your Furina, your Zhilinen, there isn't really any reason why you shouldn't have 2 Favonius weapons on your team, and this can help you drop energy requirements down to even 120 for Abyss, but for Stygian where you start with 0 energy, you probably still want to hit the 130 plus goal. Regardless of what I've said, please do not do something like run an energy recharge sands on Varesa. You want to look for ER exclusively in substats. Now for her artifact main stats and sets, here's an infographic, but you'll always want to be running an attack sands, an electro goblet, and then your choice of crit rate or crit damage circlet, whatever helps to balance your ratio out. And then for artifact sets, your only real options are Obsidian Codex or Long Night's Oath, and even though Oath is a signature artifact set, both of these do kind of have issues. The main upside of Obsidian Codex is the massive crit rate boost, as well as the fact that when you are in your Fiery Passion state, Obsidian Codex will buff all of Varesa's hits, whereas the main drawback to Long Night's Oath is the fact that it will only buff your plunges. Regardless, even with that small caveat, Long Night's Oath is of course the set you want to be farming for Varesa, and while Obsidian Codex does look very close on paper, if Varesa is a character you plan on maining long term, and using in multiple different Stygians, I really do think Obsidian Codex for Varesa is just a filler set, until you're able to grind a better Long Night's Oath set. It just scales much better with her investment, and the massive increase to her plunges allows you to push damage breakpoints much more comfortably. So if you are using Codex or planning to put Varesa on a Codex set, I would really encourage you to grind Long Night's Oath instead. Now for Varesa's weapons, here's an infographic of that. I don't think there should really be anything too stand out here. Her signature weapon is just much better than the other options available. If you don't have her signature weapon, any of the 5-star statistics are fine, except for Skyward Atlas. Flowing Purity is the best you'll get from a completely free-to-play weapon, and it isn't really that great. So if you do have no 5-stars, I'd recommend using Widsith. It's competitive with some of the other 5-star statistics, with its buffs averaged, and that's about it for her gearing. Let's talk about her teams next. Due to Varesa's energy needs, the first team building hurdle to get over is the Electro you're going to pair with her. There's only 4 real options here in Neonton of course, Auroron, Fischl, and the Nepha. Oh, sorry, I forgot Sara, she exists too. Starting with discussing Eonsun, she's tailor-made to support Varesa. Being a Natlan character, she's able to hold a scroll set for her, and she gives Varesa a massive attack buff, as well as a damage bonus buff at C6. The only downsides to Eonsun is that you may not get a lot of copies of her, and if she's pre-C2, you are better off using the other options. But if you do have a C2 Eonsun or more, there is really no reason to consider any other Electro other than you just want to use the Electro. While to be fair, if the Papilla ever comes back to Stygian, Varesa with Auroron was one of the better checks to it over Eonsun, but I do feel like that is more of a niche case. I guess we can just speak about Auroron, but I'm not really sure how to evaluate him because I'm sure people also don't really have his C6. Auroron being a Natlan character also provides the scroll set buffs, he is a good battery for Varesa, and he also does some minor AoE personal damage. And if you have him at C6, I think he's a very competent Eonsun replacement. Regarding Fischl, I would only really recommend her if you're also using Durin. Otherwise, Fischl isn't really doing a whole lot. She's a great battery and does okay personal damage, but I would only really consider her with Durin for the hex buffs, in which case she's comparable to a C2 Eonsun, which is a big achievement. The next Electro unit to talk about is Sara. She actually provides a ton of buffing for Varesa, it's just that she's somewhat stiff and awkward to play. Sara is another get my C6 or kill yourself character, and because Varesa is able to freely swap out after her plunge combos, after every 2 you can swap into Sara to reset up buffs. And lastly, there's Nefa, which there also really isn't that much to say. Nefa doesn't provide any buffing, but she's by far the strongest sub DPS here, and her damage is more than enough to make up for the lack of buffs. And with Columbina, you can actually get very close results to Varesa's best teams, but because those teams are less focused on Varesa's damage, it's very likely that your Varesa will outscale those type of teams. And if you wanted to play a Columbina and Nefa team, just use Flints, but regardless, Nefa is also just another fine Electro. As I said at the start, there really shouldn't be that much of a reason to not use Varesa with Eonsun, but C6 Sara, C6 Auroron, Fischl with Durin are all fine replacements, especially for a lower Constellation Eonsun. Now to go into actual team archetypes, I'm going to start with what I think is the best one, especially for free-to-play to low spenders, which is just Chevreuse teams. They by a pretty large gap have the highest potential out of any other Varesa team, and I think the supports for Chevreuse teams are better than the supports for any other archetype. In these teams, your core is of course Varesa, Eonsun, and your Electro option of choice, and then your premium pyro options will be Durin and Movwika. Durin with the new artifact set releasing in 3 weeks is decently ahead of Movwika, and I do think he's the better pyro support overall, especially with the further you invest into Varesa, and I think it's better to have Movwika as her own DPS. But if you are interested in Varesa Movwika teams, they are extremely fun. Because of Varesa's flexible fields time, Movwika is able to do her own combos within a rotation, and it doesn't really hinder the team at all. You can of course just play Movwika as a traditional sub DPS and only do her burst and skill, but the team is by far the best if you treat it as a dual DPS team, chaining together both Movwika and Varesa's combos. And if you really want to learn the team, you can pull off incredible shit like this. Outside of the 2 pyro sub DPS, my next recommendation would be Bennett. It's Bennett, he buffs a ton, and you don't even run into uptime issues on Chevreuse's Reshred, as you can just swap into Bennett to apply pyro and refresh it. And this is another team that scales amazingly with your Varesa's investment. After Bennett, I do think the rest of Varesa's options become more cope, but Pyro Traveler is fine, he applies constant pyro, and gives minor buffing with his C1. Eonsun is generally going to be the main scroll holder of the team, so the optimal way to gear Pyro Traveler here is to have him on Tenacity, and because the dominant aura in this team will be Electro, running 3 EM main stats on Pyro MC is optimal here to max out his overload damage. So that's just a nice way to get free damage out of him if you aren't doing that already. And the last pyro option to consider is going to be the Eternal Chef Xiangling. Just for full transparency, I would never really recommend Xiangling. Pyro MC is a free character and just performs as good as her without any caveats. Xiangling's main issue is the fact that she just normally forces you on 20-second rotations, and those are really uncomfortable to play with Varesa, Varesa, as it means you just have to do unbuffed plunges. But if you do want to make Xiangling good, one thing I came up with is the idea of doing desynced rotations with Varesa. To explain in more detail, most rotations in Genshin are synced, which means you do the same loopable actions over and over again. But there are certain teams like Hyperbloom teams and Taser teams where it doesn't really make sense to do a synced rotation, and instead you just want to cast abilities when they're off cooldown. So using Llama Hyperbloom for example, you would just cast Llama's Burst every 15 seconds, Xingqiu's every 20 seconds, Yelan's every 18 seconds, you get the point. And because Varesa isn't tied to a specific skill state, this is something you can do with her and Xiangling to bypass the 20-second restriction and just make the team flow smoother. And the way you're going to do this is by casting Xiangling one action later in each subsequent rotation, so you never have to wait for a burst to go off cooldown, you just use the other characters. For example, in the first rotation of this chamber, Xiangling is cast after Chevreuse, but when we get to the second rotation I'm going to swap to Eonton instead, and then I cast Xiangling afterwards. And then in the next rotation you play as normally skipping Xiangling, but you then want to cast her burst after the first skill plunge combo. So instead of using Xiangling perfectly in sync, you just pretty much cast her burst whenever it's ready. But if you don't want to go through all of that hassle, then yeah, just put the Pyre MC in the bag. For the gearing on this team, it does vary quite a lot. Chevreuse has a multitude of sets she can run, whether that's Song of Days Past, Noblesse, or just running 2-piece to reach 40k HP, and then building damaging substats. If you're not using any of the Natlan characters in your team, so like official Durin team, in that case you would want to run Chevreuse on the scroll set, as it is just the most effective buff due to how long it lasts, even if Chevreuse isn't a Natlan character herself. But if you are using a Natlan character in your team, then ideally Song of Days Past, Noblesse, 2-piece HP. For your Electro units, Eonton and Auroron will obviously want to run scroll. Fischl optimally runs Tenacity, but Golden Trope is fine. Sarl will use the scroll set if there's no Natlan character on your team, and Chevreuse isn't using the scroll set. Otherwise, just put her on Noblesse. Xiangling, Malvika, and Durin will also just run their best damaging sets. The next Varesa archetype is going to be her hyper carry plunge teams with Xianyan, in which the core of these teams is your Electro support of choice and Xianyan. And the last slot is just a competition between Shilinin and Furina. Furina just wins. With Xianyan on the team, you're able to max out Furina's fanfare, giving Furina very good buffing as well as her sub DPS damage. And because Xianyan is already holding Verdescent, unless you're up against the enemy with a ton of resistance, Shilinin isn't really providing a whole lot. Regardless, speaking about this archetype more generally, it's very recommended to do if you are lacking the premium pyro options for Varesa and you want to conserve your Bennett for a different team, as well as if you just don't have high constellations of Chevreuse. This team also does have real 5-star vertical investment from Furina C2, C3 and so on, and Xianyan's constellations. So if you've already acquired like a C2 Varesa and are looking for more vertical paths, getting Xianyan, Furina, Jilin and constellations could be what you want to go down. Other than that, there isn't that much to say about the team. I already covered the optimal way to play this team at the beginning of the video. In regards to gearing, the only note I want to mention is that if you're using the Shilinin variant, you obviously want to put Shilinin on scroll, and then your Eonton or Roron will hold Noblesse instead. And Xianyan always wants to run VV. And just to help out with rotations, you most likely will be casting Xianyan after you cast your Eonton or Electro support, just so you can get a consistent Electro swirl, especially in Furina teams. Now, outside of these two main archetypes, her options do get worse, but there are enough generic buffers in this game that you can just slap most of them together and make a good team. As long as you are keeping the core of a second Electro unit, mix and matching any two generic buffers really won't be the end of the world. But if you aren't using Chevreuse or Xianyan teams, you are only playing Varesa at like 70 to 80% of her max potential. And for a quick note about Aggravate teams, I do consider Dendro supports like Nahida to be generic supports. Aggravate is a buff. It's just that Varesa's own motion values massively outscale any additive damage you get from Aggravate, and the amount of aggravates you get per second is a lot slower than Chlorinde or someone like Kishing, so I sadly can't really recommend it at all, unless you genuinely have no other option, or need Dendro to pass a shield check. Now, Varesa being a more modern DPS pretty much ensures that all of her constellations are good, and I would really incentivize pulling for Varesa constellations, especially if your Eonton or Chevreuse aren't C6, as one of Varesa's biggest flaws is the fact that so much of her power is tied to C6 4-stars, and you can only really guarantee Chevreuse or Eonton constellations by pulling on Varesa's banner, or I guess Jilinin, but Let me not say my opinions on her. Starting with Varesa C1, it augments her Ascension 1 passive to basically just boost the damage Varesa does outside of her Fiery Passion state. Compared to other C1s, this isn't really the strongest, but still a nice 13% increase. You can't really go that wrong there. Varesa C2 is the biggest and most impactful one, as it just allows you to perform Varesa's special burst after every single plunge you do, while also gaining 11.5 energy per plunge, allowing you to fuel these bursts. This also just brain deadifies Varesa's gameplay, as your goal is just to do 5 plunges with a burst. How you do those plunges doesn't really matter. If you have your skill up, use your skill, but if your skill isn't up, then do a charge attack for a manual plunge. The only real downside to Varesa C2 is the fact that it does increase her field time, but at this point you're doing so much damage to where it doesn't really matter, and you should be pushing high enough breakpoints regardless to where you won't really feel the impact of this. C3 is just your +3 to her burst, which is a 10% increase over C2. And how much increase from C0? Varesa C4 has 2 parts to it. The first part of her C4 is kind of bait, as when using Varesa's default elemental burst, the damage of your next plunge will be massively increased, which if you want to set up a cool nuke is fine, but this isn't enough to where her default burst is used in her combos. And the second part of her C4 is just a generic 100% damage increase to her special bursts. C5 +3 to Varesa's basic attacks, 13% damage increase. Now for Varesa C6, it's thankfully very basic. Varesa gains 30 energy whenever she enters Apex Drive, meaning you will never have to worry about energy on Varesa ever, and her plunging attacks just get 10 crit rate and 100 crit damage. All in all, regarding Varesa's Constellations, pretty much all of them are good, either giving her more quality of life or being generic damage increases, and especially having something like her C2 would allow her to brute force even some of the harder checks in Stygian for dire content. And this will also conclude the guide portion of this video. Now ultimately, what do I think about Varesa? Does she still hold up in today's meta? And is she still a unit worth pulling for? Well, Varesa definitely still does hold up in today's meta. Her premium team with the Durn is around the 6th or 7th highest. That wasn't on purpose, I swear. Her premium team is still one of the stronger teams in the game, competing with Skirk. It's just the Nordcry DPSs with Columbina she loses out to, as well as Movuika and Skirk. But at the same time, you can only have one Columbine on your account. So especially for something like Stygian, if you're trying to distribute power as evenly as possible, a Varesa team is definitely in that discussion. The only real issue with Varesa is that 2 of her best slots are 4 stars. 4 stars with very good constellations. If both your Chevreuse and Eonson are like C2, you're losing around 30k DPS, which honestly should still clear Abyss just fine, but pushing Stygian, Fearless, and Dire consistently may be very challenging with that amount of damage. So if you want Varesa to be one of your top damage dealers, that does mean going hard on her banners, and trying to get those 4-star constellations, which will also result in getting constellations of Varesa, which isn't really a bad thing at all considering how good they are. And even if you don't plan on using Chevreuse long term, just having a C6 Eonson to take anywhere with you on any of Varesa's teams is nice flexibility quality of life, as the baseline damage of a C6 Eonson with Varesa is very good. I don't know if I still have the gameplay, but I'll put up on screen if I do, but I was able to dumpster the last Abyss using a dumb team like Fiorina Llama, just because Dendro checks the crab the easiest. And I'm pretty sure for one of the Stygians, Zajef just used 3 different Varesa teams, and they were all able to clear Stygian fine. I think Varesa is like the last damage dealer we've had in a while that just does damage without having a team gimmick like fighting spirit restrictions, lunar restrictions, or elemental reaction restrictions. Her best supports are just on her banner, so unlike some other 5-stars with a dedicated 5-star support, where you have to kind of decide between getting the dedicated support or vertically investing into the DPS you want, Varesa can kind of just do both at the same time, which is nice, but it becomes a double-edged sword because C6 4-stars aren't guaranteed. Anyways, I'm yapping. In terms of both gameplay and numbers, Varesa still holds up nowadays quite fine, but so much of her power is locked behind 4-star constellations, and those 4-star cons are vertical investment, and you need to plan your pulls carefully so you can build a competent team for her. You can't just be at 70 pity, do a 10 pull for Varesa, have a Caesar Eonson, C4 Chevreuse, and yippee, that's a top 10 DPS. You are going to want those Eonson constellations. Chevreuse constellations aren't a must because you can play other teams, but still, I hope I've gotten the point across. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on Varesa, and if you're pulling her, as I would love to hear it and I respond to almost every single comment. Channel members, thank you all so much for your support, it means the world to me. Oh, and I think this is being uploaded on Christmas, so Merry Christmas to all of you, Happy Holidays, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.